Shinde, your host for today. I'm pleased to welcome each and every one of you to this full day seminar on internal audit organized by the Pune branch of WIRC of ICAI jointly with Pune branch of FICASA of ICAI. Firstly, I want to take a moment to express our heartfelt appreciation to all of you for choosing to spend your Sunday with us at the seminar. We have an exciting agenda ahead filled with valuable insights, engaging discussions, and networking opportunities. Together, we are about to embark on a journey of knowledge and experience. Thank you for being here, and let us make this day a memorable one with all of you. Before proceeding further, let us take a moment to cherish our prestigious profession. So I request everyone to rise for the motto song.
येष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्विमाणः निर्विमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्वैता 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 एतद्वैता
I would like to call upon stage our dignitaries, CA Samir Karyekar sir, speaker for our first session, and CA Rajesh Agarwal sir, chairman, Pune branch of WIRC of ICAI. A big round of applause, please. Standards on internal audit, which I believe is a topic of great significance to the chartered accountants. These are the pronouncements which form the basis for conducting the internal audit activity and are designed to help the internal auditor to discharge his responsibilities. It is an honor to introduce you all to our speaker for the first session, CA Samir Karyekar sir, who is a partner in PG Bhagwat LLP since 2004. To talk about his professional qualifications, he is a FCA, CISA, DISA, and certified internal auditor. He has more than 20 years of experience in managing several large and multinational internal audit clients, mainly in the engineering, automobile components, steel, retail, FMCG, IT, ITES, and banking sector. He has also handled several large GST audits, fraud investigations, and management audits. Now I request CA Rajesh Agarwal sir to felicitate CA Samir Karyekar sir.
Good morning, everyone. I've been given the topic of standards on internal audit. Just to get an idea of the attendance, who all are into full-time internal audits, if you can just quickly. Okay. So majority is non-internal audit. So standards on internal audit are some things like accounting standards. These are not notified yet, but these standards will guarantee a minimum quality of internal audit services. So if you are not into internal audit, but I presume you must be in some kind of audits. So these principles for audit remain same as standards on audit are there, pronouncements by ICAI are there. I'll run you through all the standards on internal audit currently published. So these are the new series of internal audits which are now currently published, and the earlier internal audit standards are kind of being replaced by these. So the Internal Audit Standard Board, which is now Board of Internal Audit and Management Accounting, has made these standards on internal audit. So their job is obviously to formulate these, publish these, disseminate knowledge regarding these, and then subsequently these eventually would be made mandatory. So currently these are not mandatory in nature, recommendatory in nature. So apart from this, obviously the board is into a lot of research for what are the current internal audit related activities worldwide going on, what are the best practices, and accordingly formulate standards. And for these standards, obviously there is a stringent process of going through study groups. It is discussed at various councils. There is a multi-level review mechanism based on which these standards are issued. So as I said, these SIAs are a minimum requirements that apply to all members. Now, internal audit usually is carried out by, under Companies Act, by not only chartered accountants, but will be carried out by cost accountants, or it can be through external CA firms, ICWF firms, or can be an employee of the company. So that is the current requirement under Section 138 of Companies Act. So these standards apply to all the members of ICI Institute, and this is applicable to both in practice as well as to CAs who are working as internal auditors within the company. The objective of SIAs for any standards is obviously standardization. So any chartered accountant who does an internal audit would require to follow this with an objective that his services would be similar, will be consistent. Any chartered accountant who does internal audits based on these standards would deliver a comparable outcome. That is, a minimum quality is ensured. That is why any standards like SIAs are issued. So the current requirement of SIAs is that for under Section 138 companies, all companies or auditors doing audit of these companies have to follow this, and for all others it is to be followed 1 year after, but these are still not notified, as I said. Now the preface to this SIAs defines what SIAs should be, what it should contain, and the various series or the categories of standards on internal audit which are proposed to be issued. So the SIAs are principle based. So the standards do not actually give you, you have to do some things in this format or in this manner. It does not enlist all the to-do things. It will give a broad principle based on which an audit is to be carried out, audit activities are to be carried out. And what should be the outcome is also stated in these standards, so that these will obviously, as I said, comparable. And of course, there are explanations of each and every step or each and every element of these standards. There are series. So earlier it used to be standards on internal audit 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it is a series, so it has been categorized. So 100 series defines all the key concepts. Then 200 series states what the internal audit management, how it is to be done. 300 and 400 series are relating to the actual conduct or execution of the internal audits. And 500 are the specialized areas. So there are technical guides also currently available. So technical guides for pharmaceutical industries or auto component industry. So there are specific technical guidance notes also, which eventually would come under the 500 series. 600 series is the quality control. So there are no current standards under this. So these are under the process of issuing. And 700 are others. So these categories, 600 and 700, currently there are no standards under these. The next is the framework. The SIA actually gives a broad framework within which the internal audit function needs to operate. The basics is obviously the Code of Ethics, which includes the Chartered Accountant Act, the ICI Code of Ethics, and the ICI pronouncements. So these forms the fundamental basis of all the internal audit functions, or the members have to operate obviously within these boundaries. Then it is the definition of internal audit has been given in the framework. I'll just read out. Is internal audit provides independent assurance on the effectiveness of internal controls and risk management processes to enhance governance and achieve organizational objectives. So this definition has been elaborated element by element in the subsequent slides. Now the basic principles of governing internal audit. So one of the 4 pillars of the internal audit standards is, or internal audit function would be these basic principles, which are similar to for what we have read in the Code of Conduct and other pronouncements. So these have been explained subsequently. And the key concepts which are forming part of this 100 series, which is the nature of assurance, internal control, what it entails, and the risk management, its process, governance process, how it is to be audited, and the compliance with laws. So these are the key concepts which then are used in the subsequent standards on internal audit. So there are currently 19 SIAs which have been issued. And of course, there are additional guidance notes and technical guides, which is the 4th pillar of this framework. So this altogether is the framework or the standards on internal audit, including the preface and the framework considered. We'll go through the basic principles of internal audit quickly just to revise. So these have been there for a long time, and these are the fundamental principles of audit also, for any other audits also. So all these internal audits would be or necessarily need to be performed based on these principles. And if there is a departure from these, this has to be included in your disclosures as part of the internal audit report or as part of the engagement letter even. So first is independence, which I think everybody is aware of. You have to be free of influence in mind as well as appearance. You have to resist any undue influence being put on. Typically for internal auditors who may be part of the organization, it may be very important to manage this properly. And for any interference which might be undue or will affect the outcome of any audits, needs to be resisted first. If not, then you need to obviously come out of the assignment or properly disclaim or exclude those areas from the audit. So it talks about that in further detail. Now how to overcome this is by rightly positioning internal audit itself. So in an organization, if internal audit is positioned and is reporting to some general manager who is reporting to a vice president and then further on. So if there is a considerable gap between those people who have been charged with governance, that is maybe the audit committee or the board of directors, or if there is any other mechanism in place in an organization, if there is too much gap between the internal audit team or the chief internal auditor and that final authority, then it may not be rightly positioned. They may not have right powers, adequate powers to actually discharge their functions properly. So that positioning in the organization structure is also very important. That will also guarantee a lot of independence to the auditors. Of course, powers given has to be part of the initial engagement. So if it's internal, it can be audit charter, which should enumerate what are the various powers given. So powers should be that access to all the people whenever it is needed, access to all the information. Of course, has to be within the confidentiality policy of the company itself, but necessarily needs to have those powers. Without that, no auditor, no internal auditor can really give a meaningful output. So this has to be ensured. So whenever a chief internal auditor or an external party or a CA firm actually engages, they have to make sure that these powers are stated explicitly as part of the engagement letter. So the earlier SIA 8 or in the new SIA series, that has also been explained that this needs to be part of the engagement letter. Then of course, if there are any limitations in terms of skill sets or in terms of any specific area, those limitations also need to be recognized and identified so that it is clear that those areas cannot be in the scope, can be another mechanism developed for those audits. Then integrity and objectivity is a requirement, basic requirement. Due professional care is where the auditor or the team who is actually auditing needs to have those specific skill sets. That is very important. And of course, they have to be diligent in their workings, in their audits, in their approach, and have to demonstrate that in all the various steps which are there while planning or while actual execution. So the scope identification or risk identification while defining materiality, all these aspects would require due professional care, as in any other audit. Confidentiality is utmost important if you're auditing, say, R&D division, or you're auditing any very sensitive area within the company. Then it has to be demonstrated how you are going to audit it. If you are going to audit payroll, then obviously you need to have a different mechanism how data is accessed. So maybe you take a laptop or a desktop from the auditee, tell them, give data on this, and we will audit and take what is relevant for the observations and evidences. So that kind of mechanisms will have to be developed based on the area and sensitivity of each area, so that the confidentiality is not breached, and the auditee is also confident that they can actually share this data and the internal audit function can happen smoothly. And of course, the final output also needs to be confidential. Most of the internal audits are deemed to be highly confidential and have to be distributed only to a specific list of people, which usually is part of the initial engagement with the auditees. So during the initial stage itself, that clarity, if it is available, then the actual discussions and finalization of the audits can happen with these people, and then distribution can happen to only these people. One more thing over here is, a lot of times in internal audit, there is a lot of, in one audit there might be multiple areas. So you are doing procure to pay also, and you are doing some other R&D function also. And it may happen that you have a consolidated report. And then you can't just attach it and send it to everyone. Even though you might have a restricted distribution list for payroll and restricted distribution list for any other area, the company may not want the R&D department to know payroll ke points and vice versa. So you have to be careful in terms of what actually you are delivering, and be sensitive of the stakeholders also. You can't then have one report. You need to split it into multiple parts and then distribute. These are very small points, but can result into a big issue later on. Then skills and competence is utmost important again, is because if an internal audit function undertakes an audit which they are not capable of, obviously the outcome is not going to be what is desired by the management or by the company who is engaging the internal audit function. But it's not that you always need to have an internal skill set. You can hire somebody from outside, and then demonstrate that this can be done, and obviously with due disclosures to the company or management that these skill sets are hired from outside, and obviously you need to do your own background checks, you need to know the person or the company, and that there is another standard which says how to use experts, external experts also. Risk-based audit, now this is important is because the standards specifically say that this whole approach needs to be a risk-based approach. So you need to identify, do a risk assessment at entity level, then identify at locations, or you need to segregate those areas, do a risk assessment, and then identify which are the high risk areas, medium, low risk, and then prioritize. This can be done once in 3 years, this needs to be done every quarter, and so on. So that risk-based approach is what is necessary over here. That of course needs to be demonstrated also. So there is again a standard of how to go about risk-based. Now these principles are necessary obviously to establish credibility. So if there is another internal audit function and you are in competition with somebody else, these are the standards which will help establish that this is the methodology, or these are the basis on which all internal audits are conducted. Then it lends credibility to the whole exercise, and of course this will help in jotting down all the various essentials which are necessary for the activities in the internal audit process. Then another very you can say specific requirement is need to have a system and process focus. So the internal audits traditionally or earlier, which I used to see, were more transaction based. So there were companies who had an internal audit function which used to act as a bill passing function. So every expenditure bill will go to internal audit, they'll sign off, and then it will go. Yes, that is important from a propriety angle, because those internal audit teams had their own advantages of experience, and they knew what is out of the bounds expenditure, what is allowed, not allowed. There were advantages. But at the same time, it was not a process driven, it was a very transaction focused audit. Though the propriety angle was good, it did not result into any sustainable benefit. So what is sustainable benefit? If the process itself is designed properly, controls are designed properly, then in that case, it will help in long term. It will not result into you can say a short benefit. Now, the shift, therefore, what is told is it has to be from detective to preventive. So whenever you implement a process, when you implement any controls, it is there are more preventive controls. So whenever you assess your whole internal audit control or the internal audit universe, you can also look at how many preventive controls are there. So as you automate more, there will be more preventive controls rather than having more detective controls. So this shift is what again is recommended. Then obviously, to avoid conflict of interest, internal auditors or any auditors cannot be part of the decision making process. The internal audit reports can be referred to for the facts. So the internal audits need to present the facts, the evidences, and leave it to the management or those charged with governance to actually take decisions, take corrective actions. Of course, recommendations can always be given. So as part of the internal audit report, the recommendations can be given, but usually internal auditors should not participate in decision making. Do not give, opinions can be given, recommendations can be given. Sensitivity to multiple stakeholder interest is what I talked about, is that example where you cannot give one report to another. So that needs to be understood. Now, not only internal stakeholders, there might be external stakeholders also. So internal report is used by banks a lot of times, is used by parent companies. So in that case, those requirements, what would those stakeholders need? What do those stakeholders see in the report also need to be considered to do all your audit planning and the execution part also. Then obviously continuous improvement, we are doing continuous improvement, CP is one process, but there has to be a process more technical if it is required for audit team. If they are doing more audits in the ERP controls, they are doing more audits in any particular area, those technical upgrades are important, including the law related upgrades and all. So can anybody tell what are the series? We can just quickly, recall this. What is 100 series? Key concepts, right. What is 200 series? Can you speak up? Management, right. So key concepts has 5 SIAs. Internal audit management has 5 SIAs. 300 to 400 is the conduct, the actual execution, which has currently 7 SIAs. 500, the specialized has 2 SIAs, and the quality control and 700 currently have no SIAs. So total currently we have 19 SIAs, which we'll go through one by one. Now, the first SIA is relating to the nature of assurance. Now, internal audits or audits per se can be of various types. Internal audit can be that, do audit of only labor laws and give us an output, or it can be a very specific area. Now, these standards particularly are, you can say, need to be applied in a nature of assignment which has an opinion which is required. So an opinion about how internal controls are there in a specific area or at a particular location or for a particular subsidiary company. So wherever an opinion is required is where these standards need to be applied. So which can be a reasonable assurance or limited assurance assignment. So these do not apply where you need to give a category to any particular observation. So if you have observations and you have to give only rating to that particular observation, this will not apply. This will apply where an overall opinion is required regarding internal controls. As I said, it will not apply to statutory non-compliance reports where there is a specific SIA, say related parties. So in that case, it is only audit of a particular area. Then in that case, there is, it will be a kind of a absolute assurance. This is where applicable is where there is a overall assurance, reasonable or limited assurance, and you do a sampling and then arrive at a conclusion. So where the assurance is required. So we'll go into the more details of that, technical details. The last part, is where technical reviews or due diligence assignments are there. So these are not covered under the SIAs. Now components of assurance, these are what I was saying have to be part of the engagement letter also. So usually this is an agreement between 3 parties, the auditor, the auditee, and the assurance user, which can be audit committee. In simple context, it will be the company. Within the company, there might be one department, auditor, and the audit committee finally is going to look at the audit report. So that needs to be part of the engagement letter, all the expectations, powers, what accesses are available, what are not available, what are the limitations, all these need to be agreed upon in this engagement letter between these 3 parties. Then 3 key elements have to be subject matter, what is to be audited, why it is to be audited, what is the purpose of audit. It can be sourced from the risk assessment of the company and any other maybe event which has happened, which is the basis for getting this internal audit done. So that needs to be identified, what is the subject matter. Then predefined criteria, because if you're going to give an assurance, it needs to be compared to some predefined criteria. So what would you call as the controls are strong. So what would it mean? If it is, is not very strong, I mean it needs improvement, then what would be those criteria? So you can have a agreement which says that how you are going to rate or give an overall opinion. So if those criteria are defined, then at the end of it, there will be no disagreements, because typically at end of it, there can be a big fight between the auditee, auditor, that, how have you rated this high risk? So somebody might argue, say, this is not high risk, this is low risk. But obviously the auditors or the members need to be independent in their opinion and state what they, in their professional judgment, think is the rating. But it is obviously a better process if you have this defined before you enter into the area. And of course, it needs to be a conclusive outcome. So it needs to be part of a report and given, arrived at systematically. And the formatting has gone off over here. Sorry. The last third part is written assurance which is given. So obviously we give a report which will describe the opinion of this engagement. Then subject matter, which is again specified in the engagement letter, should be identifiable, measurable, and evidence. So these are primary elements of any report or any audit area which you undertake, have to be there, and without that you cannot give an opinion. As in any audit, you have to apply professional judgment, as I said, in terms of risk rating or which areas or how sampling is to be done. So their professional judgment necessarily requires to be applied. But of course, it is better to have a consensus, as I said. Now again, predefined criteria, the standard says should be as part of the engagement letter. It is better to have that. And it can be derived from Ind-AS, from other accounting standards. It can be derived from other internal audit frameworks. We have SIA 315. It can be from COSO framework, which is widely used. Or it can be a mandate. If it's a statute, it's clear what the statute needs, and then accordingly the opinion can be given. And informal is where you have internal benchmarks decided with the auditee. So these criteria need to be there. For statutes is where I'm saying the opinion is required as per the statute, not audit of the statutory requirements. Then these, as I said, is relevant, have to be, all these criteria have to be relevant to the engagement or the area which is being undertaken. And these are, the logical elements of all the predefined criteria to be useful in the report finally. Yeah, sure.
So I think beautifully covered. On this standard, engagement letter you mentioned about, it is very, very important. And while we give an engagement letter or take an engagement letter, I think we can even restrict our liability. So, and the standard talks about, like, when you do a company audit, what do? Is it, what type of assurance do we give there in company audit? I can't hear, sorry. True and fair. And when you're doing tax audit, in a way you are doing a true and correct, because you are saying whether these are DA, TDS, TS, this, that, etc. Here we are talking about a reasonable assurance. Because now everywhere people feel like internal audit to identify all frauds.
Hello.
The institute says, sorry, no, it is not the requirement. We don't expect that from you. Okay. So अगर procurement का audit कर लिया समीर ने, तो इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि like there is no fraud in procurement. We selected sample, we done an analytic procedure, we taken reasonable care, and we give you a reasonable assurance. We does not give you a guarantee that there is no fraud or no wrongdoing or nothing wrong has happened and we identified everything. That we are not doing. And like Samir was mentioning, assuming agar there is a borrowing from bank of 5 crore rupees or 50 crore rupees, and that is for setting up a factory. And you need to give a certificate to the bank that every money which was borrowed has been used for that purpose and not for anything else. Then you are giving an absolute assurance. An absolute assurance is an agreed upon procedure assignment as per SA 700. Okay, so that is an agreed upon procedure assignment, that is not an inter-audit assignment. Let us be very clear. So here we are giving reasonable assurance. And engagement letter is very, very important, like I said. I can, if I don't write something, tomorrow like say I'm doing a procurement audit or GST ka input credit ka, I did not make an observation and the management did not get the input credit properly or something went wrong. The management will come and say that you did not do work and hence I'm sending you a legal notice. Can they send a legal notice to us? The answer is possibly yes. For how much? Maybe 1, 2, 5, 10 crore rupees. Can I write in my engagement letter that if I will take reasonable care, but if something goes wrong, then my liability is restricted to the amount of fees received till the date of happening? You can. So put that amount, because it is a contract, two parties signing. Put that, include into the engagement letter. Similarly, he mentioned a very important thing about the data. अगर कोई लैपटॉप घूम गया आर्टिकल के पास से और उसमें सेल का आप रिव्यू कर रहे थे और प्राइस सेंसिटिव इंफॉर्मेशन गेट लॉस्ट, देन व्हाट डू यू डू? They can file a case on you for data protection, okay, that you were not very, like you did not take care of the data properly. You put all of those in your engagement letter. What if your client is based out of Dubai and he files the case in the court of law in Dubai? Will you take the flight and go to Dubai on every hearing? The engagement letter may likho that audit assignment is happening in Pune. Something goes wrong, the court of law will be Pune. So there are so many things which you can write, and the format of engagement letter is available in SIA also, standard on auditing, or SIA may be available. So I think so well covered. The standard is really beautiful. पहला standard नहीं था, अभी नया अवतार में आया है, and we should take care of this standard. Thank you, Samir. Sorry.
Now moving to the next concept is internal controls. So since majority are not part of this, I'll just go through this. Internal controls are systemic and procedural steps adopted by organization to mitigate risk primarily in the area of financial accounting, reporting, operational process, and compliance with laws and regulations. So you can see internal audits now are not necessarily restricted only to the financial reporting or only accounts department audit. It's not no more in that sense viewed also. And if you ask me, my experience is all the internal audit scopes now 50% are non-financial only, or within area order to cash, we are also looking at even the pricing strategy related aspects. So it is the audits and the expectations are going more and more towards operational, and how internal audit can help the management also in the advisory role also. So those kind of expectations are there. And mitigation of risks is a lot of managements, family driven or owners tell me, you are our eyes and ears. So you have to tell us if something is really going wrong. So if it can also be a strategy, a lot of times managements are focused on growth and all, and they are not looking at certain areas. So in that case also, internal auditors are looked upon to make sure we have the back of management independently, obviously, as to what really is going on the ground. Is there any wrongdoings? Is there any deviations which need to be looked at or need to be escalated? So a lot of operational areas, and you need to be really alert while doing audits. Now internal controls per se, what we look at will be all these control activities, which is the review mechanisms, the approvals, what we call maker checker, actually physically counting, segregation of duties. So these are elements of any audit which obviously apply to the audit of all the processes and controls. Now various types of controls are there, which can be manual controls, automated controls, as I said, preventive controls, detective controls, then ITGC, which is not directly affecting but which is indirectly affecting. If you have given access to users who are not supposed to have access to those users, obviously there is a risk that somebody can enter transactions which they are not supposed to. So there are ITGC. So these are certain areas which have to be looked at. So even if you are doing a small area, you have to look at all these aspects, including the IT controls, how management is looking at it, how MIS for that particular area is happening. So it will cover all these types of controls. Now, management responsibility. Now, in any scenario, the responsibility of operating a particular control, keeping an eye on risk primarily, obviously, is with the management. As Murtuza also said, it's not that tomorrow if a fraud happens, it is responsibility of internal auditor. Even though he is part of the organization also, he is not all the time looking at procurement. He might be looking at procurement in a certain quarter or in a certain period of time. So that responsibility primarily rests with management, which includes obviously everybody from bottom to top. And that is stated specifically in Companies Act also. It is specifically stated in LODR also, where the certification of CEO and CFO is required, where they specifically state that it is our responsibility. So this also needs to be part of the engagement letter. It should say that primarily the responsibility rests with management. Auditor is reviewing, this is the methodology, and this is how we are going to arrive at conclusions. This is how we are going to give you assurance. Now, responsibilities of auditor, as we said, obviously is that he needs to be diligent, he has to have adequate skills. Those are necessarily the responsibilities of the auditors. He has to have his own review mechanisms. So a lot of teams have article assistants. So you need to have a review mechanism to ensure that what is being audited or which comes as outcome is factually checked, and it should align with the audit objectives. And obviously the responsibility lies on fulfilling the mandate. So a lot of internal audit teams are given a mandate for a year, 2 years. It can be a long-term 3-year, 5-year plan also. So those fulfilling of mandates is necessarily responsibility, how to plan, hire resources, hire technology or implement technologies for audit is the responsibility primarily of the auditor. Now, there are several other definitions. There is a definition of internal audit or internal controls in SIA 315. The guidance note for IFC also defines it. And section 134, which is the Board of Director responsibility statement, also mentions about these controls and audits. The next is the concept is relating to internal controls, what actually it covers. So as you can see, there is a concept of internal control over financial reporting, which is purely finance related controls. Then we have operational controls, which I talked about, which is covering the entire scope of a particular area. Then there are, so these two together, operational financial, will be called as IFC, internal financial controls. Though there is a word of financial in that, it covers both operational as well as financial, plus the entity level controls. So what are the entity level controls? Few examples can be having a delegation of authority matrix for the entire organization. Who is supposed to do what has to be defined, and particularly important in a complex organization. And even though it is a small organization, it is better to have that clarity so that there is no ambiguity as to the responsibility in terms of efficiency also, and in terms of how internal audit would look at it. So entity level control would be IT general controls, delegation of authority matrix. It can be the external audit, or there are other experts and consultants coming in doing jobs. So all these entity level controls, HR policies, appraisals, all these will be entity level controls. All these together will form internal controls. So in any particular area also, even if you take order to cash, hire to retire processes, it will not only be that department, but how it is viewed by maybe at the regional office level. They might be under the regional office, and then how it is viewed at the board level during their monthly review meetings. All those aspects also need to be seen. Then only we can say we have looked at all the internal controls applicable to a particular area. Now these obviously are related to how controls are also aligned to this. So there can be multiple process level controls and the control environment related aspects. So control environment means all the policies and procedures which are defined, code of conducts which are defined by the company. All these will form part of the control environment. how frequently does the audit committee or board meet the internal auditors is also setting a control environment. So there it has to be more frequent to portray to entire organization also that this is an important function and it is going to be reviewed and we are going to follow up also whether we have implemented or not. So that sets the right tone or the control environment. So it should be a policy driven process, internal audit also, and part of the control environment also. So all these together will be called as the internal control system. So the internal controls and its review mechanisms together will be the internal control system. So there are internal control frameworks, as I said, SA 315 or COSO. So this is a comparison. So like we do for accounting standards. So accounting standards elaborate how accounting is to be done, disclosures are to be done and all. And it is compared to what the company is doing. So every standard has that objective. So whatever frameworks we have versus what the company has actually implemented is what will give you the differences and the areas of improvement. The next concept is risk management. So quickly, for everybody's benefit, I'll read through this. Is risk management is a process with a series of steps taken on a continuous basis to identify the threats and vulnerabilities. You know, what can go wrong, analysis what we know, assess them for severity and likelihood. Now, obviously, what can go wrong, the human mind can go to any extent. So you have to also limit it to a little practical view on what can go wrong and assess them for severity, likelihood, monitor these risks. So once you have identified all these risks, you have to keep on monitoring it and obviously keep on changing the risk levels or the risk categories. Prioritize them for action. So once you have prioritized or risk assessed, you can see what is most important, take action on those risks first, and minimize their possible negative impact through mitigation actions. So it can be, for example, now the latest development is Digital Personal Data Protection Act, which has come notified in August. Now the penalties of those are up to 250 crores. Okay, now it is too far-fetched to think that a company which is, I mean, if it's Google, Amazon, and these people who are actually having huge databases, those will get affected. But there are companies we might be auditing which also have a lot of personal data. Now that risk needs to be identified and assessed whether this is really going to affect, because the implications are too severe. Now we might practically think कि अभी आया है act, कौन आएगा, अभी तो rules भी नहीं आए हैं, but it needs to be highlighted by internal audit function if he is doing a review of whether statutory compliances are, that process is properly implemented or not. And you find this Data Protection Act, nobody's taken cognizance also. You need to identify that as a risk because the process itself fails in identifying whether, applying the act, whether it is to be applied, and we need to identify processes or implement new processes or not. So that needs identification, prioritization needs to happen on a continuous basis. Now this purpose of this risk assessment SIA is obviously to ensure that there is a framework. The company needs to have some kind of a framework for risk assessment. Now a lot of companies who, the listed companies need to have this as a mandate. But for other companies, large companies which might be still private companies, it's not that they are not facing these risks. They might not feel the need for it because the owner or the people who are operating the functions might be there for 20 years. And typically they might think, "Arey, isse kya hoga? We'll just prepare a document." We in our mind know what the risks are, which is very true. People who are doing procurement for 20 years, 30 years, they would know where supply chain is going to fail. Or somebody who is operating a certain business, software company, he knows data protection law aa raha hai. But it has to be operationalized also. It's not only knowing it will do the job, it has to be operationalized. Somebody needs to continuously look at those risks and whether all the, you can say, departments or processes down the line also are doing their jobs to mitigate these risks. So that framework is required to ensure that it happens even if the people who are in charge are not looking at it on a continuous basis. So this ERM or risk management framework would require that kind of leadership to convince other people why it is required, why should put in a formal framework and so on. So it is a very difficult process to initiate it, set the culture, make sure that risk assessment is part of every step in the regular business processes. You have to also set the tolerance in this. So typically, जिसका पैसा लगता है वही risk जानता है. External party, internal auditor, or somebody coming from outside who doesn't have a skin in the game, he will not know what the risks are. But if you ask any owner, sir, आपका fraud risk कितना है? I mean, it is like asking कितने तक fraud आप allow करोगे? It's not. So any owner is going to say fraud तो होना ही नहीं चाहिए. But nonetheless, it has to be formally defined as to what would entail a high risk fraud. Fraud are obviously not allowed or cannot be tolerated, but you need to prioritize, for which you need to set some levels. So anything going above 1 crore is critical. It is within this limit will be high risk and medium risk and low risk and so on. Somebody, किसी ने double travel bill दे दिया and it is around 5,000. It does not require chairman ka time. It can be addressed at the CFO level or it can be addressed at general manager level. So that categorization is required for that. So you set tolerance limits, and then as per those tolerance limits, you can set responsibilities. We're going to address it also. Then again, the risk management is also, as I said, part of the LODR, the listing agreement requirements. It is also part of the Companies Act 134, which is the director's report, and the audit committee responsibilities also require risk assessment or risk management. And for auditors' responsibilities, COSO also has a ERM framework. There is ISO 31000, which gives a detailed risk framework or enterprise risk frameworks. And of course, there are other sources. So if CEO and CFO are already giving this certificate, then there will be an internal process also available already for the risk assessment part, which can be reviewed by the internal audit function. There are self-compliance certificates. So part of this, CFO do not give this certificate on a standalone basis. They would obviously gather that confidence of signing of this based on the internal sign-offs from other head of departments or other functions. Typically the risk categories and all are given in these frameworks, but broadly the risks can be financial risks, technology related risks, obsolescence and all is very high now if it's a software company. Strategic risks, the game can completely change because of disruptions which are coming on now. So reputation is highly regarded. So for all the companies where you audit, reputation is very important. So related to those, the risks can be categorized separately. Statutory and regulatory risks are on a continuous basis changing. Environment, health, safety related risks in certain category of companies are very important. So there are various categories. So these are prescribed by these frameworks, or it can be also from the basis of the owner's perspective or those charged with governance perspective. What do they consider, which categories do they consider as relevant or which can be identified by all the stakeholders. Then the next concept is governance. Now governance is again relating to what you can simply say as whether everybody is doing what they're supposed to do. It is a very simple statement, very difficult to implement, and this is again a continuous process, though by law, again, based on listing requirement, you need to have corporate governance related process, certification and audit and all that. But this is a continuous process, again, requires a lot of top management involvement. On a continuous basis, you need to engage with all the stakeholders to ensure that these integrity, accountability, trust, and all these elements are recognized and followed. Now, governance activities obviously enhances the organization's ability. It is also part of the entity level control, and there are specific activities which can be done to enhance this overall governance mechanism. So I'll not go through these each and every one. The important ones are, one is transparent communication, where you need to engage. So a lot of companies have these, entity-wide open mic sessions, or it is called town hall meetings. So these all are the activities which are important to ensure transparent communication happens. So everybody is not guessing what is happening. Then, as I said, there are statutory requirements under which this corporate governance or governance is required. And auditor's responsibility is to again review this. So it can be part of internal auditors, you can say, scope also to review these activities which are happening. So first of all, you need to have defined it and then audit it. Now, these are certain enabling mechanisms. I'll quickly go through this. Shared organization, vision, mission, objectives are given, code of conduct, whistleblower mechanisms are there, open communication I mentioned. There have to be various governing bodies which are there. It can be right from canteen committee to remuneration committee. The organization design and structure needs to undergo change continuously as the organization changes. Delegation of power and authority has to be documented for clarity. Then of course the regular training programs is part of the HR mechanism, but again which is important to create awareness and also can be used for governance related objectives. And it is used for tracking for business performance obviously. So budget versus actual is a very established process now, but as can be part of the governance, is part of the governance process also. And from the internal perspective, it is important that the reporting to those charged with governance, which can be audit committee, board of directors, other committees which are formed for specific purposes, that reporting and communication is very important. The next concept is the compliance with laws and regulations. Now compliance is obviously letter spirit, both is a given, has to be done. We obviously check whether returns are filed on due dates or not, records are maintained or not, all these. But compliance with laws and regulations, as part of any internal audit scope, it will be financial reporting, compliance with laws, and operational objectives. These three elements necessarily will be part of the audit checklist or audit scope. So again, compliance activities would enhance organizations' abilities to grow in the legal framework. And for this, the companies usually have implemented sometimes softwares or tools which track this. It can be outsourced, which keep the company updated about the new statutes which are coming, changes which have happened. So you need to have a comprehensive database, assign it to the relevant person, specifically assign the owners, who is going to own TDS filing, who is going to own data protection, who is going to own which statute, and which regulations within that has to be specified to ensure compliance with laws. And the auditors would review whether such kind of a implementation has happened or not. So I'll move a little fast because there are many SIAs to be covered. Now the enabling mechanisms will be, you need to have a policy at an entity level regarding compliance. Any non-compliance, anybody who is taking it casually need to be penalized, will receive a notice, or whatever can be the internal mechanism to ensure things are happening. The tone at the top is very important in this case, because chalta hai attitude should not be accepted. कि ठीक है रिटर्न फाइल कर दिया, महीना डिले हो गया, इंटरेस्ट भर दिया. So that kind of attitude, if is accepted, then it keeps on deteriorating. It can go into various other non-compliances also. So the tone at the top is important. The database we talked about, compliance owners we talked about, training is important. So even you need to be updated, you need to subscribe to certain newsletters and all, so that you know what new changes are happening. As I said, compliance systems can be softwares or internal declaration mechanisms. So I've seen companies who take declarations from owner. I mean, it's a very loose control, I would say. वो क्या एक कागज आता है, he signs, all statutes which I am responsible are complied with. That's not adequate, obviously. So those have to be reviewed. So deploying technology or these kind of declaration systems. And of course, track performance by way of audits or by way of notices you receive. So any notice you receive will obviously also bring about any non-compliances. Then timely communication, again, is the same for earlier for earlier SIA. You have to report what is not complied to the committees or those charged with governance. Then coming to the now internal audit management, the internal audit function, obviously there is a team of chief internal auditor and its members. It can also have certain technical or specific experts relating to IT, relating to any particular manufacturing technology and so on. So if they are not there, you need to plan for these resources, acquire them, engage them, and of course in the regular performance related reviews, they have to be included in these. So internal audit team's responsibility is to plan overall, as I said, for short-term and long-term plans. The scope definition, what methodology they are going to use, they need to continuously improve upon these methodologies. And of course, monitor its whether the plan is going as per what was decided on. The responsibilities, we have talked about these earlier. The chief internal auditor has to keep an eye on whether we are fulfilling what is expected of us or not, and whether we are following the standards or the methodology which was decided. And this preferably needs to be, because internal audit is also a process within the organization. Even if it is an external firm, they need to also demonstrate that they have a set process. So it is better to have a internal audit process document, which will include processes relating to evidence, how we are going to do walkthroughs, how we are going to assess the risk ratings and all. And the resource planning needs to be documented, progress monitoring needs to be a dashboard, and the quality plan, how the review mechanisms, maker checker within internal audit is going to happen, also needs to be decided and documented. Now this is the overall internal audit planning, which is done at the start of the period or year. And obviously there are requirements under Companies Act also for auditing certain areas. And there will be requirements of presentations to be made every quarter or at a fixed periodicity. Now while doing overall internal audit planning, the risk assessment is very important, entity level and also at process level. So it will cover all the organization, businesses, locations, legal entities if it's a organization with having multiple subsidiaries and all, and also including third parties. So if there are third parties, like payroll processing is outsourced, a lot of manufacturing functions are outsourced, so those third parties also need to be identified while defining this internal audit universe. Then objectives are obviously relating to the overall objectives of internal audit for the company. So these have to be aligned, the charter or the engagement letter we talked about. Now these have to be confirmed also. So at right points of time, you need to go to the people who have been charged with governance, whom you are functionally reporting, and you have to show them to them. So it should not happen that the engagement letter is being signed by somebody down the line. If we are functionally reporting to, say, audit committee, then the representative should ideally sign the engagement letter. So that you should ensure. HR and other resource planning we talked about. You need to engage experts if you don't have them. So these are all the documentation related requirements. As I said, planning process should be a document. Knowledge of the entity is very important. So you document what you know about the entity and keep on improving every year or as the changes happen. This is important for succession also. It's not that internal audit team is going to remain same forever. So whenever team member changes, you need to have this knowledge document so that you bring up to speed the new joinees. Then the audit universe, the risk assessment, the risk rating of each area, the technologies which need to be used. So a lot of audit committees might have a requirement that we have now all scanned documents of all travel claims. So please use some AI tools to find out if there are duplicates being scanned and uploaded. So there are technology expectations also from internal audit function. So those also need to be fulfilled. You need to do data analytics of this certain area. So we get demands also from audit committees that we need data analytics to be done. So don't tell us we did sample and we are done. We need you to review the entire database and tell us if pricing is correct. So those technology related requirements can come from charged with governance. Then of course, monitoring reports need to be there, minutes of meetings. These are the typical requirements for any function to operate. Then objectives of internal audit, I think these we have mostly covered. So these are usually part of the engagement letter, and we have already discussed that it needs to go through the board of directors, ACM, and those charged with governance. Engagement letter we have already discussed. And the objectives of internal auditor obviously will be broadly to monitor if something is going wrong and if internal controls are operating effectively and as designed, as expected or not. So this again enlists all the charter related requirements. So what we have not stated here is the work paper of ownership. So a lot of times if there is an external firm, cost accountants or chartered accountants coming in and auditing, it needs to be clear whether working papers will be shared or not. A lot of audit committees or the operational management need the work papers also. So that clarity needs to be brought in, what is going to be shared or not. So if you have a procure to pay ka checklist, 200-page checklist, now you must have put in efforts to bring that checklist or contextualize it to that engagement related activity, and you need to take a call whether you are going to share it or not, or you want to treat it as your intellectual property. So that clarity needs to be there in the engagement letter. And the last part, I think Murtuza covered jurisdiction part and termination. That also needs to be clear that if there are certain limitations being put on the internal auditor, we will terminate this. So you can specify scenarios where termination might be required. That is very important in case where there is a risk that the internal audit might need to be abandoned. There can be situations, or you might have knowledge beforehand, before engaging also. So that termination related assessment or clauses need to be there. Now using work of an expert, as I said, if you don't have skill sets, you hire. But you can't just pick up anybody and then start using him. You need to ensure again the elements what we talked about of independence, objectivity, competence, all need to be there and tested for that resource. It can be a person or it can be a company or organization which you're hiring as an expert. So all these elements will obviously apply to those entities also. Now you need to get an approval. So if you are doing this, you can't just do it on your own. You need to get an approval. I think I mentioned earlier. You need to evaluate, like you do a background check for an employee, you need to do a background check for this person or that organization also. And you need to be involved. It's not that internal auditor has outsourced this. It should not be treated as outsourcing. कुछ नहीं देंगे अब ये कर रहा है ITGC तो will not do anything. It should not, that should not be the approach obviously. You need to be involved in what areas they are covering, what is the scope they have defined, whether they have documented their methodology or not, how they are going to maintain work papers, all these. What is the responsibility of internal auditor continues to remain the internal auditor's responsibility even in a scenario where an expert is coming in. So all these steps, the internal audit function or internal auditor, chief internal auditor needs to be involved. And of course, finally, when an outcome is given by the expert, you can't accept it as it is. So the internal auditor, chief internal auditor needs to be involved in verifying it also, whether appropriate audit evidence as per the SIA and as per the requirements of the engagement have been given, whether coverage has been done or not. If there are any issues, if something was not provided to the expert, I mean, in the report he can just claim, out of 10 things, 8 things not received, so I have not done 8 things, I have done only 2 things. So in that case, obviously, the object is not achieved. So you need to be involved, obviously, on an ongoing basis, but the report can't say that 8 things not received, so I have not done. So you need to make sure that he's getting what he's supposed to get, and he delivers on what is promised. And of course, you have to be involved as a agent between the expert and the company to ensure there is harmony in what is happening. If it might be new for an expert to come as an auditor. If he has done it before, then he obviously knows how to handle auditees, how to get data or how to get cooperation. The next is communication with those charged with governance. This is a very important activity, and a lot of times, a lot of good work is done and does not get communicated in the right manner. So internal audit function have to insist for a meeting with the audit committee, with the people who have engaged you, to ensure that all the observations are communicated. Or if there are any difficulties that need escalation also is escalated at the right time to these people who have been charged with governance or whom you are functionally reporting. So it has to be on a continuous basis. It has to be process driven. In a sense, you need to, again, as part of the engagement letter or initially, need to decide that on, if it's a long-term assignment, that we'll meet twice in a month on so and so dates, every Friday, or in a fortnight, last Friday. This is going to be the agenda. This is how we will report. We will require approximately 1 hour for this. Needs to be decided. That is what we can call it as process driven. And without this, you are not going to get recognition, and obviously the internal audit function per se will not obviously get positioned where it is what we are desiring it to be positioned at the right place. So there has to be a push from the internal audit side also, and obviously there has to be, we need to also tell the people, those charged with governance, that it is important to lay down this process. So obviously the elements of independence, timeliness would apply. I mean, you can't audit in July and report in December. You have to make sure that all the reportings, and particularly if there is a critical issue, you identify any fraud indicators, those have to be immediately informed. So the timeliness of sensitive issues particularly has to be you need to keep in mind that it needs to be communicated immediately. Then the typical agenda of these meetings can be, plan versus actual, significant issues, the risk assessment outcomes. If the assignment was risk assessment, then the outcome, it can be in draft form also if it's not a final meeting. And what is the implementation status of previous observations? That is very, you can say, area which is interesting for those charged with governance. They want to know what you did last time, उस पे कुछ हुआ कि नहीं हुआ, कि आप ऑडिट करते जा रहे हो, रिपोर्ट पे रिपोर्ट दे जा रहे हैं और कुछ नहीं हो रहा है. So that should not be the impression which the audit committee or those people should get. So every time I to definitely make sure that that is highlighted. 20 points, उसमें से 5 ही point implement हुए हैं, बाकी पे कोई ध्यान नहीं दे रहा है. And I mean, whatever enemies you would make, you will make, but this is an important communication which needs to be done. Then planning the internal audit assignment. Now this is a subset. This is, now we are coming at an assignment level. So we planned at overall entity level, and now this is a particular assignment. So the planning mechanism or elements more or less remains same. Is you need to define what the scope is. You need to be specific, obviously, about what you are going to cover, which locations you are going to cover, which you are not going to cover. If you are going to cover sales, then maybe the new formed branch may not be part of the scope, but that needs to be defined. Usually it takes shorter time. Obviously the entity level plans will be very long term. And of course, these need to be a basis for the final report which we are issuing. This will, planning will include, you need to have a kickoff meeting. You will state what the objectives are, and then you will have to have a preliminary review. So that also needs to be planned, because if it's a completely new business you are auditing, you have not seen it before, then you need to have a preliminary review, understanding of the business itself along with them. So that needs to be clarified. Ki audit nahi hai, this is our understanding process. And after this we will plan our audit and then come back to you. So that can be divided into parts and communicated. That those steps need to be clearly told to the auditees. Then of course, what is the approach? If it's not an investigation audit, please communicate to the auditee accordingly. Otherwise, audit aa raha hai, yani ki people sometimes get scared also. And you need to inform them that this is an internal review. We are not going to go and report this to government, or we are not going to go and report this to anybody. So people or auditees might be there who have not faced internal audits previously. So you need to be clear what the purpose is going to be, who are you going to finally report. You are going to get an chance to reply to the queries. Draft report will be given. So all these methodology and the approach needs to be clearly told so that there is no resistance. So you need to handle very carefully a new function or new area you are auditing. Then the skills technology part we have already covered. And this is the requirements in terms of documentation. So these should be part of your working papers. So if you have internal audit manual, should have the planning process. Should have details about whom to meet, how to approach the meetings and all. And of course, evidences. So this is very important to communicate. Is so a lot of times, articles or team members will go and take photos. If you are doing procure to pay, you get observation, khadak se photo le liya. So that is a lot of times auditees view it as, "Arey ye kya kar raha hai? Kuch some espionage is going on." So it should be made clear that we are required to gather evidence. Whatever we report has to be supported by evidence, and for that we are going to do all this. So that if in the initial meeting itself you clarify that this is the evidences or documents we are going to need, and we have already signed a NDA, so don't worry, and we are storing all these on your server only. So all these need to be communicated so that there is no misunderstanding. Then evidence per se, the requirements are given in the standard. So internal audit evidence refers to all information used by internal auditor in arriving at the conclusions. So, a good thing about internal audit is whatever you report, there is a natural internal control. Whatever auditor reports, that is going to be cross-checked by the auditee also. That is a good thing. So it's not that we just report and the auditee accepts. There is a draft report and the audit is going to check. If we report, ये double payment हुआ है, this invoice is double booked, or this inventory is not there, it's not going to be accepted as it is. But of course, when you're reporting, you need to give evidences why you are saying anything. So it needs to be relevant, appropriate, reliable, consistency. There can be a third party also. So if it's a subcontractor and he has some inventory, he might be giving some confirmation for that, and we might go and verify it also. So there might be third party confirmations which you are relying upon for overall inventory related assurance. So these are basic characteristics which should be there for evidence. It should be reproducible, as I told that if you have taken photographs, scan copies, Xerox copies, then we need to make them available to the auditee also, so they can cross-check what we are reporting. So it should be copied and independently reviewed. So, and of course, we have peer review also. So in that case also evidence is required so that the peer reviewer also can arrive at the same conclusion. And it should be authentic. Now, photos can be, now though it's the age of tampering only, with AI, a lot of tampering can happen. So you need to also prove if it's not tampered. So, geolocation is there, the date, time is there on the photo, or whatever evidence you have scanned should be there. So it needs to be taken care that it's not misconstrued, or we are all honest and giving right evidence, that there might be tampering from other side. So you need to be careful about all that also. And of course, if it's a third party sourced, then that source should be authentic. Now these are obviously taken third party confirmations and all with due information and permissions from the internal governance owners. Then internal documentation are the work papers. So there is a standard about how these are to be maintained. And of course, the mandate of maintaining it for 8 years and all applies for these work papers also. So these audit documentations have to be obviously for each assignment, each report which you are going, need to be stored in a systematic manner, should be retrievable and all. If it's hard copies, you need to have storage mechanisms for that. Now, one of the unique things is this 60 days criteria which is maintained. So this is, you need to complete the documentation. So usually for an internal audit report, what is stated in the report definitely is evidence. You need to attach annexures, evidences for that. But where there is no observation, procurator might have 100 checks and you might have observation in only 2 of it. But the rest of 98 also need to be evidenced as to whether audit was done or not. So in that sense, those have to be compiled, and because of the urgency and the time available, might have to be done a little later. So the standard specifies 60 days. So usually all the filing, foldering, all that needs to be completed. And as in now statutory audits and all, NAFRA has now specified archival has to be done in 60 days. Of course, that's not for internal audit, but eventually for all audits, it might be extended. So it includes all kinds of evidences, electronic, that is more now. And of course, you need to also protect these. So there needs to be again a written policy and process as part of the internal audit manual, how this is storage is done, how retrieval can be done. Now there is a lot of, you can store it on OneDrive or these common shared folders of the company themselves which are accessible to us. So if there are confidentiality issues, I told you how it can be enabled. But nonetheless, if for peer review or for other purposes also, this needs to be maintained. So you need to ensure that even if the client is not there tomorrow, you have access to it, or you can copy it and keep it with you. Now this review and supervision standard refers to the maker checker within the internal audit function. So this is important for quality control, obviously. So review is at the end, or you can define milestones when the audit manager is going to review, when the senior manager is going to review, partner is going to review. And supervision is an ongoing thing. It is not deep diving into what audit was done, but mainly whether the milestones are happening, whether kickoff meeting has happened, whether the meeting with the head of department has happened, whether walkthroughs have happened. So those broad milestones and tracking progress would be called as supervision. Then obviously why this is required to be done is finally for ensuring quality deliverable. And the review also should be one up, is what the standard says. It can't be a peer review over here. It should be one up. And obviously not everything can be reviewed by the chief internal auditor. There has to be again part of the internal audit manual defined delegation of authority, who can do what, and that should be obviously evidenced. So review notes have to be maintained, emails have to be sent. So those communications are required and to be maintained to prove that reviews were done. So this is obviously applicable to the broad plan, whether the audit itself is getting aligned to what was agreed, whether the evidences are there. So all the compliance with the standards on internal audit will also be part of this review. So this I think we have discussed. So this again recommendation is you need to again have a written policy. So the internal audit manual will have to define all these aspects. Then communication with management again is, you can say, very similar to communication with those charged with governance. And the objective of this communication is to arrive at a consensus. So if the operational management or HODs we are discussing this with, it should not happen that when we go to the audit committee, there is a big difference of opinion. The audit committee is going to ask, you were not talking to each other or what? So you can't have a situation where you are fighting in front of the audit committee. So that consensus or discussions have to happen much beforehand. And in that, whatever changes, additional evidences have to happen beforehand. So you need to agree on, again, the process, when we are going to meet. What the protocol can be, whenever we have an observation, we'll email you. We'll have a Friday meeting, and the draft report will be done in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, which will obviously be sent to you before we do a final report. And obviously you cannot have unlimited time to respond on the draft report. You need to have a fixed time. So that protocols can be agreed beforehand. And of course, it can be multi-channel communication, and timelines need to be defined, and content can be pre-decided, or participation can be pre-decided. The last element of documentation remains same. Then 370, reporting issues, reporting of the results or the issues or observations will be to those charged with governance. This we have already discussed. What additional is here, no final report to be given without a draft report is one of major requirements. I think other elements we have covered. So content and format for every report, you can have a standardized format, but if in a particular assignment which is unique, not the usual thing you do, you're doing an audit of, say, intellectual property rights related process. It is quite different than your order to cash or procure to pay related reviews. So in that case, it might be a different reporting format, but broadly it should state what are the scope, objectives, what are the extent of checking, sampling which was done, should have an executive summary, Then the risk ratings can be part of necessarily of the report, and the action plan and due date. So what corrective action management has agreed, and what is going to be the final submission related dates. And of course the signatures and all will follow. And for all the members, particularly in practice, the UDIN is a requirement for all assurance related engagement. So that has to be part of the report. Another 5 minutes? Yeah, okay. Now 390 is relating to monitoring and reporting of prior audit issues. I think we have already covered this, the importance of this and expectations relating to this. One of the things which the standard says is you can have an auto alert system. So I've seen in a couple of companies, they have a software in which they will put the internal observations, and in which the due dates and actions and person responsible email IDs are given, and there is an auto reminder which goes. So that the standard says, that kind of technology or softwares can also be implemented if it's a large organization and a very large number of issues come up. The standard also says how the closure should happen. So if it's a critical issue, it needs to be re-audited. If it was a medium risk issue, you can review certain documents, samples, and close. If it's a low risk issue, a declaration can also suffice. So again, can be part of the engagement letter to decide how closure is, what are the closure related protocols. Then this is 520, which is under the specialized area, information technology environment. So the standard defines what is an information technology environment, which is all the operating systems, storage, dealer networks, e-commerce, if it's an e-commerce website, then robotic process automation related tools. Now, information technology environment is important and growing in importance is because the nature of risks are different. Here, user access rights will be important. Where the data is stored, who has access to it is important. Whether third parties are involved in it is very important. So the audit objective, though remaining same, the risks would be quite different than internally managed process, or IT, majority of the process being managed by IT would have different risks. But the process would be understanding of the business, understanding of the IT environment, what all it gets, and of course identifying the skill sets. This is very important because this is a completely different area, and if you really want to go in depth and provide assurance, then you need the right skill sets. You can't say I've audited the business continuity plan without having ever maybe framed a BCP or ever actually being in a situation of BCP. So it is better to have these skill sets in your team. So the areas under this can be IT strategy, governance, then all the specific apps, softwares, disaster recovery, and user acceptance test. If there are self-development softwares, those can also be audited, those processes can be also audited, including the user acceptance tests. I think the audit execution methodology more or less remains same. Now there can be unique things like ethical hacking can be one way of auditing also. So you actually have skill sets where you can give assurance that your network structure architecture is good, and all the operating system application level controls are reliable by ethically hacking. I mean, that will be the best assurance, or to identify where there are loopholes, there are open ports, and so on. So the execution part elements more or less remain same, and the documentation requirement of this remains same. This is the last area, is the third party service providers. There are companies where IT function can be outsourced. Now a lot of ERPs are in a hosted I mean, complete ERP is being hosted by software companies. So payroll is a typical example of outsourcing. So in that case, again, what we talked about using an expert would also apply over here. Is we need to also review whether those service providers are having an agreement, and it has all the elements of indemnification, of they doing risk assessment, they doing reporting to us. That needs to be also reviewed, which will include all the elements what we talked about, including IT general control testing. Now we need to review this third-party service provider related agreements in detail and make sure that the interests of the company are ensured, and whether there is a defined protocol between company and the third-party service provider. So there has to be a maker-checker every time. So the internal, there will not be a huge team, but there have to be reviewers within the company who are monitoring these third-party service providers. So these oversight mechanisms are something which are unique over here. And of course, the service level agreements are also there. And how this is going to be reviewed. So if it's a mission critical kind of outsourcing, then it has to be a continuous internal audit part and needs to be part of the internal audit process document. That's it. Any conceptual question, maybe 2 minutes we can discuss. Otherwise, to you. Yes.
How far we are going to address the issue of subjectivity?
Yeah.
Because when it comes to internal audits, of course, we are giving some assurance and giving some opinion about the the health of the entire process. But how far this will help us in addressing the subjectivity part of it?
So the assurance needs to be objective, is part of the basic standard. So in the framework also it says that any assurance by any member has to be objective in nature. So that's what we said, is if it's a assurance assignment, limited or reasonable, we need to have predefined criteria as to if it is a procure to pay related process for which we are going to give assurance operating effectively or not, or risk grading we are going to give, then how are we going to achieve that? So the pricing related is going to have the highest importance. So if that is decided between the auditee in the predefined criteria of rating and with the sampling and methodology also agreed upon, then it would not remain subjective. It would become more objective in terms of the final outcome. Because at the start itself, it is known that this is not absolute assurance. As sir said, that it does not mean there is no fraud. But there is at least no indication of fraud. Even if you do complete data analysis, we can reasonably assure that, okay, there have been no major changes in prices. We can reasonably assure based on data analysis that these bearings which we were buying, only 5 to 10% broadly has changed, which might be a major raw material. So that provides a reasonable assurance. Now within that 5-10%, if there is a kickback, we can't assure that. Okay, thank you everyone.
Here, the standards, I think he is covered in 1.5 hours. And these standards, I think whether it's Samir, me, Milinji, we can speak for 1.5 days, or we can even go on speaking, and it cannot be covered in detail. So I think really hats off. Huge round of applause for Samir. So well covered and in so detail. At least the slides, when you look at, you will not have to read the big book which the institute has given. I'll quickly touch upon a few things. So he had on his slide, one was on the scope exclusion. A company appoints you and says there are 5 factories, but they say don't touch the 3 factories or don't touch my 2 businesses. You can write in your engagement letter, okay, this is excluded from my scope. That is one. One other thing is on the scope limitation. तो अगर समझो जैसे लाइक अभी पुरुषोत्तम इज गोइंग टू कवर ऑन एचआर, और एचआर ऑडिट में टिपिकली ऐसा होता है कि लाइक सी सूट का टॉप मैनेजमेंट का डेटा हम लोग विल नॉट गिव यू. If you don't get any information, even after pursuing, then you write in your report by way of scope limitation. Okay, this was not covered by me. So we have a separate slide on scope limitation, which many of us have. So I think that also can be done. And of course, report distribution he covered so well. So we write in the slide only like who are the recipient and who we mark CC2. But if a law enforcing agency comes to you and seeks your report for any action, then also you can you inform the management and you will have to give, but otherwise your report is only for the management and for the internal purpose. That is what we write in the report, and the standard also says that. As of now, the standards are not mandatory, they are recommendatory, because many places internal audit professionals are not only chartered accountants, they are like MBAs, engineers, etc., also chief audit executives. So that is one thing which I just wanted to touch. Entity level control, there are so many which is showed, code of conduct, code of ethics, and so many things, I think. And during the day, we'll cover a lot more there. But let me cover only 3-4 things which are of very important, which Samir covered. One is governance. The whole of governance is a big area of practice for all of us. कितनी कंपनीज में कोड ऑफ कंडक्ट बनाना है, कोड ऑफ एथिक्स बनाना है, डेलीगेशन अथॉरिटी मैट्रिक्स बनाना है, रेम्यूनरेशन कमिटी, now with the whole POSH coming in, sexual harassment committee, so all of those can be done. When we talk about ESG now and the BRSR reporting, so many requirements are there which we can cover. If you look at like completely, when you talk about now the social stock exchange in India, NGOs and NPOs can go and list on the social stock exchange. So before that, the whole whatever documentation, policy, procedure, we will be able to do it. Massive big area of practice for us on the governance, on the ESG side. And compliance is so beautifully explained. Like now the most of the companies, the board says like we want a compliance report from the management. Management is CEO and CFO. They are busy in their life. तो कितनी जगह पे टूल है compliance का, and I would request everyone look at this area of practice. You look at compliance tools, take access to them on their cloud, etc., pay by the user or whatever, and approach the companies and tell them that every quarter I'll come, look at all your compliances, who is a maker, who is a checker, whether it is done or not, and I'll give a report which you can table with the board. And even if it means a 50,000 rupees a quarter and 2 lakh rupees a year, and you do it for 100 companies, just calculate the amount which you will make. So only by itself compliance is an area of practice. Only by itself related parties is an area of practice. So much more is happening. And one very important thing which you touched upon is the whole Digital Personal Data Protection Act. I got so many points, but I'll stop now. So the DPDP, again, if you read the act, it is simple. Chartered accountants can understand. Again, it will mean writing processes, etc., creating templates, documentation, databases, which everything we can do. And only for putting up an intrusion detection or a security or a cloud security, we'll need IT professionals. So I think we should look at and explore that area of practice as well. So beautiful. And I think with that, I would request that we all carry out a huge round of applause for Samir. Really, really. Samir, thank you.